Welcome to another edition of the Chiropractic Universe with Dr. David Serio. Today I have the honor and the pleasure to interview one of my great friends, Dr. Simon Senzon. We went to Sherman together, we graduated together. Um, Hours and hours of deep conversation with Dr. Simon, someone I love very dearly. I support, I love his books. I'm a member of the Institute of Chiropractic since its opening day. And thank you for being here, Simon. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Great to see you, man.
You too, brother. So
Thanks for doing this. Yeah.
share with us your vision. I want to say this before Simon shares. I don't know anyone who works behind the scenes in chiropractic more than Simon in creating quality content philosophically, historically. So share with us your vision.
The vision. Good question to start with there. Yeah. Well, I completed my PhD a couple years ago now on the chiropractic identity literature, which was, all the core peer-reviewed papers that discuss what is chiropractic, whether we're more subluxation, whether we're more medical, like the whole spectrum, like anything in the peer-reviewed literature about that.
Mhm.
And I did a really comprehensive PhD. People could find it online, it's available. And some of the core findings were that the most influential papers, the papers that really drive the whole discussions in academia, in accrediting bodies, in, within the organizations that kind of rule the profession, there are certain papers that are the most influential, right? These are like the ones that get cited the most, the ones that really sort of drive the information through all the other papers. And the themes of those are pretty much a large majority of those. The themes are, let's get rid of philosophy, let's integrate chiropractic more with the medical profession, um, and let's only accept what they term as a very limited range of evidence, which is something that's been, through randomized clinical controls, and not really accept other forms of evidence which are valid, right? Like clinical experience, like clinical studies, like pathophysiological models that help us explain chiropractic. So that was kind of the main themes of these. But then when I critically analyzed the papers to see, how well they did, were the authors biased? Was their scholarship good? Were their arguments sound? And then I checked their references, right? If they say something like, oh, there's no evidence for subluxation, and then give a reference, I went and found that reference. And then I found that person's reference. And overwhelmingly, what I found was 54% of the most influential papers totally failed in their scholarship and were found to be fatally biased. So it's a huge finding, and I haven't really talked much about it publicly, even though it's been out for a couple of years. I haven't published anything on it yet, which I'm planning to in the next year. But so that's sort of my framework for my vision. Part of my vision is how do we fix that, right? Because this is our body of literature, right? Because as a profession, one definition of a profession is that it has it's self-ruling, right? It has its own rules, its own governance, and its own body of literature. And our literature is totally failing us, right? Our peer-reviewed papers, our journals are totally failing us. The editors of the journals, the peer review boards that let these papers get through and get published have totally failed for like a few decades now. And it's a bigger problem when you think about how some of those papers are accepted in PubMed and some of those journals. So so part of my vision on that level of it is we need to sort of redirect and correct the lies and the mistakes and the errors and the fallacies in the literature, so we can have a more truthful, more coherent body of knowledge that guides our profession. Just like we want coherence in people's nervous systems, right? The peer reviewed literature is kind of like the brain of the profession, right? This is where our information lies, where our discourse happens between and within the profession. And it's fine for people to disagree, and it's fine for people to argue, but their arguments have to be philosophically sound, right? Their logic has to be solid. Their evidence to support their points has to be good evidence, right? So that's part of the mission that I have at the Institute Chiropractic, is to sort of reorganize, if you will, our whole literature, our whole identity literature. And the way to do that is to publish more papers, papers that shine a light on all of these mistakes and shine truth on the whole system. And it takes time, and one of the ways to correct this is to have the correct facts as our basis. And that's was my main mission behind starting the Institute Chiropractic. I wanted to have a place for the whole profession to go, no matter what school you went to, no matter what history class you had or didn't have, no matter who your philosophy teachers were, to have everybody can go to one place and get the correct facts about our history, about our philosophy, the good and the bad. And then we could all have a discussion from there of, like, what's true, what can we all agree on? Because, a lot of, as you know, people are taught all kinds of things in chiropractic school. And sometimes it's like, people, what I've seen is new professors will take over some of the history, philosophy, theory classes, and they're so busy. I mean, they're great, they're teaching their hearts out, but they're so busy they get handed a stack of PowerPoints from the last guy who got handed it from the last guy. And they don't have time to check it all. They just assume, yeah, he taught it for a few years, it's all got to be right. I don't have time to check it all, right? So that's one thing. People have gotten traditionally the wrong information, not all the time, but bits and pieces of it, and sometimes lots of wrong information. So having one place where everyone can go and learn the facts is a crucial thing. And then we created Tick as a social network, which I think will start to take a life of its own as we get more and more members. But it's a place where we, just like Facebook, there can be groups, there can be discussion forums, people could message each other. So that part of it hasn't really taken off yet, but that's the idea, to have a online learning social network that is also like Netflix of chiropractic. So not only do I have like my own courses on there, where I go through all these different pieces of the history and philosophy, and some of the latest stuff we could talk about that I've been developing is just like off the charts. But I've also done interviews with people, like I did that one with you, Dave, and I've got this whole series. I'm actually going to do one with Travis tomorrow on philosophy and practice. So I've got a core like 20 of these short videos of people where we talk about, how they apply philosophy and practice. And then I've got this whole other series where I'm interviewing people for 2 hours about, like, people who are like legends or some older chiropractors, and just learning about like what happened, how they got to where they are, having them teach me something. So there's all these other interviews on there that are really unique and rare about the history. And then I also have access. People send me stuff all the time, like give me green books, old ones, send me boxes of cassettes and videos. And Sherman has been great with letting me pull things from their archives. So I've got this whole other series called Tick Legacy. And Arnaud, of course, he gave me 3 boxes of every lecture he's done since the 80s. and we're slowly starting to put those back out there. So I've been digitizing those, and we're subtitling them in multiple languages, which is a long-term project. I just posted one this week with our professor at Sherman, Les Wise, and he gave this great talk about 10 years ago on the standard of care, and just what that should be for a chiropractor. And that's something that we learned from him directly, but it's nice to be able to share less with the world. And there's
That
another one that I found, which was Tom Gilardi interviewing Harold Hughes, who was this amazing chiropractor who was a friend of BJ's and went way back. So we've just got, right now, there's over 200 courses up at TIC. And those are broken down into video segments, anywhere from 5 minutes to 30 minutes. So there's about 900 videos on there. And then I've also been developing them into these short blog posts. So it's an easy way for people to just get, like, and especially students, to just get some of the core ideas. So the blogs have little videos, they have deeper explanations. And then the coolest thing, which you'll see as you get it to your people in South and Central America, is we just translated the whole site into Spanish and French. So people can, and it's an app, so you can get on your phone, and the app, based on the language that your phone is in, if it's in Spanish, the app will automatically switch to Spanish. And then all the blogs have been translated. There's like 185 blogs on there. All the course descriptions are translated. And then eventually we'll have them all in subtitles. And anyway, that was a big, big idea for, short question.
Simon, that's an amazing vision because it's almost like, if I can summarize this, the the way the profession's being driven, the major premise is completely off, right? So everything below that is just incongruent, incoherent, and no one's ever really checked that and questioned it and had scholarly research about it, right? So that's a
Yeah.
huge
Yeah.
vision. That's a huge vision. And the amount of work, I've watched Simon since school, and every time we had a break, he was running to the library and researching things and stuff. I just want to really get out there, the amount of work that it takes to do what he's been doing. And this has been since we've been in school. He graduated in 2000. So, and the thing is, he's being supported by individual chiropractors, not by a school or an organization. So the way that we can help support this work, because this is essential for the survival of chiropractic, is through joining the institute, buying his books, and supporting him that way. Because also tremendous learning, uh, it's tremendous learning tool for ourselves. And also, Simon, like you said, I was thinking about that game, Telephone. When you're a kid, you tell your friend something, and then
Yeah.
it gets around the circle, and it's like sometimes even myself, Simon, I'm like talking about the history or philosophy, and I'm like, hold on, is this really correct what I'm saying, or did I just hear this through the grapevine, right? So your institute's been a great tool for me to make sure my facts are correct and everything's coherent with the truth.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Yeah, and that's really the key. I mean, one of the classic examples is the landmark Morakubo trial from 1907. This was the first court case where chiropractic was found to be separate and distinct from osteopathy and medicine, because it had a unique science, a unique art, and a unique philosophy. And there was this guy in the 1950s, this lawyer, who was doing some research to get chiropractic legalized in New York State. So the New York State chiropractors paid him a lot of money to go back to Davenport, interview BJ Palmer's staff, go through archives, go through courthouses, and look at old records and try to figure out what happened in those early days. And he ended up writing this whole report that never got published, but it got sort of buried in the Palmer archives. And whatever he didn't have the facts for, he just kind of made stuff up. and he just wanted to write this. He kind of told it as a story, and it wasn't. It was some of it had facts, and some of it didn't, and some of it he just made up. And he had an agenda. He wasn't a big fan of B.J. Palmer, and you could see the agenda coming through. But when the first chiropractic history journal was formed in 1980, the guys who started that organization and that journal, they found this manuscript in the Palmer archives, and they started publishing about it without checking the facts, and they just assumed that this guy did all this research, I guess. I don't know what they thought, but they just started regurgitating all of this stuff that was incorrect about the Morokubo trial. Like one of the things was that um, D.D. Palmer and B.J. Palmer took the work of this guy Langworthy and used it. B.J. used it in the courtroom to prove chiropractic was separate. And so these guys argued that BJ really took Langworthy's philosophy and it wasn't really the original Palmer philosophy. Another way this has been misused, people will say, oh, since they only made up the philosophy, and this isn't true, right? The philosophy was already 10 years old, and Didi had been developing it for 10 years before he even found the profession, right? But they say this, oh, since philosophy was just invented for this court case and now we're legal everywhere, we don't really need it anymore, right? So people have actually used these incorrect peer-reviewed papers to try to argue against philosophy. And that telephone game has really impacted us in important ways. So, like, for example, in the UK, the accrediting agency in the UK, the GCC, they have a position statement that says subluxation should only be taught historically, and there shouldn't be history and philosophy should not be taught in the classroom. Then there's this other group, the International Federation of Educational Institutions or something like that, IFEC they're called. It's 16 chiropractic programs from all over the world, who universities, a lot of them, some in the US, some in Australia, Canada, who say that subluxation should not be taught. And these guys, you could trace their language and their arguments back to these papers that are full of mistakes and full of bias. So, it's going to take a while to sort of turn the ship, but it's a big project. And the way that I'm planning to do it is to use the Institute Chiropractic as sort of my base. So you're absolutely right. People who join TIC are directly supporting my ability to dedicate the time and resources to publish the papers that are going to really change this. And really the literature, I said it, I spoke at Sherman's diplomat program the other day, and it just kind of came out, but I said the peer reviewed literature is the tip of the spear in the profession, right? Because even though you don't think about it much, you don't really think, it's not really a thing in your consciousness when you're in day-to-day practice. The literature is what shapes the profession over decades. That's really the foundation of the think tank, right? Of what the profession's really about. And if we're not in it and we're not represented and it's not accurate, the profession's going to go in that direction, just kind of drift. Does that
Yeah,
make
and
sense?
I think Simon, I mean, in the time we've been chiropractors, there's never been a more urgent and essential time for chiropractors to wake up to its true essence because never before you gave me a statistic one day, like for example, even the schools that were, let's say, the mixing schools still use subluxation until what year was it? They were still using that term, right? What year
Oh
was it?
yeah. Yeah, I mean in the 1990s there were several, consensus statements across the whole profession agreeing on subluxation terminology. I mean,
Right.
it it was the main focus of the profession for at least 100 years or more.
And
Yeah,
also drugless, right? So you have
totally.
subluxation and drugless, and now we're removing the word subluxation. They're trying to add in drugs. So without a place like the Institute where we're like, this is our foundation and this is the truth behind it, this is where all the misnomers come in, this is where the facts aren't correct. It's like there's no true north here at all.
Yeah, totally. Yeah,
It's important to
it
work, brother. It's so important.
yeah. Yeah, and I've been thinking about it in terms of, the sort of deeper philosophical questions. I mean, we have this premise in chiropractic, universal intelligence and all matter, keeping it an active organization. And, at TIC, I take a lot from Ken Wilber's philosophical perspective. I use a lot of his maps to sort of orient, to make sure we're being really holistic and inclusive in what we're covering and what we're looking at. And he has this really cool premise and I think I really sort of start there where we have the universe. He says we basically, if we're going to start a philosophy or really look at a premise or a major philosophical system, we need to take away as many sort of givens that we can, things that we take for granted. And he broke it down to three things basically that, yeah, are sort of essential for a starting place. One is that there's a ground of being, right? That everything's made of something, right? There's some ground that all reality is based on, right? So we could call that universal intelligence, or at least universal intelligence as a part of that,
Mhm.
right? And then he says within that, there's two sort of things. One is kind of the force toward greater organization. And he just called it eros, right? The force of love within all things, pushing everything towards greater complexity. And the other one is like a field that which is kind of the potential, the ideal that everything is kind of moving towards in some way. Not that it's having to go somewhere, but sort of a field. And he refers to it as agape, right? The love that kind of holds the universe together in some way. And I thought, what if we were to start the philosophy of chiropractic? What if we started there, which is real similar from kind of an above down, inside out, right? This kind of force towards greater complexity, greater coherence, moving evolution forward, moving life through higher ranges of complexity. And then this kind of field, which is innate intelligence's perfection, right? The expression of the ultimate perfection that it's striving to be. So we could look at all things like that. And so how can we look at the profession like that, right? Is it developing through higher levels of complexity and coherence and truth and vibrant life force? And if it's not, there needs to be a correction, right? So that we can let that come through, because that's the way things naturally happen. But if it's not happening, it's being distorted by
That's
all
brilliant.
this. Yeah.
That's brilliant. Okay, I want to change the course and ask you a couple of questions about the principle.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
about 10 minutes. Okay,
Okay.
Simon, is there any of the principles that, in your understanding, you feel are off base logically or scientifically? Anyone that you would say, you know what, this needs to be thrown out? It's not correct.
Well, I really like what David Koch did with the principles, and I know people gripe about it, but when you really look at what he did, he just said if we were to really take a structured argument,
Hmm.
before you introduce a concept, before you make a statement, you got to sort of introduce it first, right? So he just kind of moved them around, which I think is valuable. And it's I just like to go back to like Ralph Stevenson came up with the principles, right?
Right.
And who was Ralph Stevenson before he did that, right? He was a school teacher for like a decade in like a one-room schoolhouse in Canada where he had kids from I think probably kindergarten up through high school. And one of the things that they had to teach was geometry. And he says in the book, he says this, I forget the exact words. He says, you know, we're sort of doing a philosophical geometry here, you know, where he was, so he was trained to teach things according to proofs and logic to like high school students. And this is one of the reasons I think why the students, his students at Palmer, loved him so much. So what he was trying to do in that deductive argument was really just develop a way to teach his students in the simplest way possible to get these really difficult concepts that came through from DD to BJ to him. So I like to think of it in terms of that instead of like, you know, pulling one out and seeing if the whole structure stands. You know, look at it more from the big context of what was he trying to do, and did he do it, and could not necessarily could we do it better, but if we were to do it today, where would we start and how would we create that argument?
Right.
Which is sort of how yeah, go ahead, yeah.
I also love what Cloud is looking at. Like some of those print, they're not all philosophical. Some of them are scientific, and the science we know today is proving those principles to be more scientific in nature than philosophical, right? But
Yeah, yeah, it's very yeah, it gets pretty muddy there, and yeah, cloud stuff. I have yet to really dive into the newest stuff he's been working on, but I love what he's doing. It's really very cool.
yeah, and Simon, so you wrote the spiritual writings of B.J. Palmer. I love some of the greatest books there. And so, how does spirituality fit into our chiropractic science, philosophy, and art? What if you could like really sum up how it fits in? How would you explain it in a very simple way?
Well, I think one thing that's important, I think, to get that I've really been talking about for decades now is that the term innate intelligence was used in different ways to describe sort of different dimensions, right? One dimension is the body's ability to self-heal and self-organize, right? This kind of inner striving within biology to express its organization. So that's a dimension, right? That's like the dimension of the physical body. But there's a whole nother dimension or perspective, which is that innate intelligence is this kind of like spirit, right? Which is how D.D. Palmer originally talked about it. So, and BJ also talked about it in the early days that it was within and around you. So he also talked about it as sort of like an energetic field, right? In some ways. But in terms of his later years, BJ talked about how the innate could send these thought flashes of intuition to the educated, right? Which is now we're talking about a whole different dimension, right? We're talking about the internal self, right? Your ability to listen to your own inner voice, which is very different than talking about your biology and your body's expression of itself. So I think the more we could differentiate those, the clearer the philosophy is going to be for people. Otherwise, it gets cloudy and people find a simple way to sort of dismiss the whole philosophy if they don't want any of that spiritual stuff in their life, which is their choice, right? But I think you can't if, people have done that to try to make the philosophy more sound and to make it more palatable for today's world, but the critics of chiropractic and the critics of the philosophy can always go back and crack a green book and say, but what about this? Right. And if we don't have a rigorous philosophical way to describe how these things are different, how they might not have been described clearly back then, but they're still valid things that are being talked about, then we leave ourselves open for those kind of criticisms that will throw out the philosophy altogether. So that's one important piece of the puzzle.
Really?
And you know, just that idea that, you know, we have this inner dimension and we have this outer dimension, and chiropractic philosophy was trying to talk about all of that at once using the same exact words, which made it a bit complicated and overly complicated.
Brilliant, brilliant. Okay, and I have one last question. I never
Okay.
asked you. I want to know the answer to this. So,
All right.
what this is a theme I've been thinking about a lot, and in my conversation with Donnie and Arno, this is a question I would ask them, and I want to ask you. What is the true essence and the hope of the chiropractic adjustment? Like, if you were to look at it in a big philosophical way, what's the true hope behind a chiropractic adjustment?
It's a good one. Yeah. Well, I love, the vision that the more we can have clear and coherent nervous systems, the more that our children can have clear and coherent nervous systems, the more that the potential of humanity can be expressed more fully. And it's the kind of thing that is really a critical mass, right? That's just going to take maybe millennia for us to finally get to, right? But it's the long vision, right? That's that, I guess, BJ's utopia that Stevenson wrote about. And D.D. Palmer wrote, in his wide visionary way that the adjustments would eventually clear out the penitentiaries and the sanitariums. He really thought that he was, you know, when especially upper cervical chiropractors used to have, you know, cases, sanitarium cases, people who had real mental issues, real mental health issues. And of course, it's not the answer to everyone with a mental health issue, but when it is the appropriate thing, it's amazing. So, and it happens for people all the time where they just get clarity, whatever's been built up in that upper cervical spine for like 30, 40, 50, 60 years gets cleared out. Something happens. So, I think that the vision is to have a world where people are seeing reality more clearly,
Beautiful.
for what it really is.
Beautiful. Simon, we could be here for days and days. So
Totally.
thank you so much. So just I want to leave
That,
you with, how do people get in touch with you? How do they sign up for the Institute? Where can they get your books? Let everyone watching this know how they can support you and support themselves, because your information is fabulous and gives tons of value.
Sure. The Institute Chiropractic, institutechiro.com. That's where you go to sign up, become a member, become a regular member, a TIC fellow, a lifetime member, whatever feels a student member. And all the books are on Amazon, so you can just do a search. And if you're not seeing something, just reach out to me, send a message, and we'll make sure it's working. But
Amazing.
we're,
Books are
yeah.
great, great gifts for friends. Great gifts for friends.
Yeah, and our new book should be out within the month. So maybe by the time people are hearing this, or if you're watching it, check out the new book on it's the forgotten history of D.D. Palmer's chiropractic disciples. It's cool.
This will be out in about a month, so his book's probably going to be out by the time you're watching this. So,
Yeah, check out the new book. It's the bomb.
Simon, thank you so much. Anyone watching the Chiropractic Universe, please like my page, share, and subscribe. Have a great, great day.